Transportation is critical in agriculture. Transportation costs are often a large component of the total cost of delivering a good to a consumer, and transportation policies of governments play a role in the competitiveness of a region in the agricultural trade. We're going to discuss those issues in this module and give an example of cost from US to China and Brazil to China. No matter the industry, transportation is always a critical item to consider, particularly when we're looking at trade issues. Again, the easier and lower cost it is to trade, the smaller the world becomes. Transportation is particularly an issue with agriculture for a number of reasons. First, we are often moving products around the globe. We're taking products and moving them from often fairly unpopulated areas and moving them to populated areas. In the US, for example, we're taking them from the middle part of the country often, which has relatively lower population areas and within the US, than moving them to the coast where populations tend to congregate. Similarly, it's the same way around the world. We're moving those goods from places of lower population to higher population. And again, agriculture tends to occur in lower populated areas. Secondly, transportation costs for agricultural products are often a high proportion of the total cost of production of that product. We'll give an example of that today for soybeans. And also, when we're moving agricultural products, we are often concerned about perishability, particularly of fruits and vegetables and meat products, eggs, milk, a lot of agricultural products. Contamination, we need to keep that product clean, and safety. So transportation is of critical importance to agriculture. We're going to give an example for soybeans, and I'm going to take a lot of this information, or most of this information, from the publication that you see listed on the right of the screen, the Soybean Transportation Guide. This happens to be your reading for this module. You'll see it listed on the Compass website. And what this transportation guide does is provide cost of moving products in Brazil to various parts of the world, and it also compares those costs to the U.S. cost. I would suggest in this module you pay particularly close attention to 2 to 5. That's where a lot of this material is coming from. And then look through the reference pages in the back. In those reference pages, you'll find a lot of discussion on Brazil and their navigation or river system. I'm also going to refer to that in this module. If you remember a movie, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and seen that discussion or funny movie about moving around the country, you can think of that sort of in the same way with grain production. We use trucks, trains, barges, and ocean-going ships. And if we use trucks to move product in the U.S. from the farm to another assembly point, an elevator or a terminal on a river or an ocean, we could also move that from truck to a assembly point for a train. So trucks, trains are used to move grain over longer distances, barges down the Mississippi, Ohio, Illinois rivers, and then ocean-going ships. Ocean-going ships would take land or grain from ports and then move it internationally. The cost of moving goods using those transportation you see listed there. Semis or trucks is the most costly. Trains, barges, and then ocean-going ships. Moving items by water usually is less costly than moving it on land with either trucks or trains. That is going to play a role when we look at the cost comparisons between the U.S. and Brazil. Here's a map of major ways of moving grain, soybeans, in the United States. This map comes from the United Soybeans Board. Green lines represent major railways. Blue lines represent navigatable rivers, and you'll see that is mainly the Mississippi River and the Ohio River. And also the red dots give ports. Here the arrow is now pointing at Illinois. You can see Illinois is blessed with a lot of railroads and also is close to the barge area. Illinois producers can move grain easily around the nation and also have good international access. Right now, if we were looking at export of soybeans from Illinois to China, or anywhere for that matter, where the grain would generally originated from would be from farms in Illinois. That grain would be moved over to a blue line, either the Illinois or Mississippi River, be moved down a barge to New Orleans, point now, and then be loaded on a ship and moved by ship to its final international destination. To summarize the movements from Illinois to China, or for that matter anywhere around the world for export, grain would move to the Illinois or Mississippi River, generally by truck. Then they would move down the Illinois-Mississippi River by barge, as long as those areas are clear of ice. Often the area above St. Louis, sometimes in winter, often in winter, becomes ice-filled and you can't use it. If it's frozen, then you'd have to use trains. And then at New Orleans, loaded on a ship for destination to its foreign port. Here are a look at those costs then of moving grain. I have a red arrow above the 2012 column for Davenport, Iowa. This publication gives it for a number of places: Minneapolis, Davenport. These are U.S. costs, and again, that comes from the publication that I pointed to earlier, page 5 on that. And if you're looking at 2012, you'll see that truck cost $11.29 per metric ton, rail $24.16, and during 2010, 2011, and 2012, rail had to be used because of frozen river or other issues. Barge $22.89, ocean $46, for a total cost of $87 per metric ton. So if you look at that publication, you can see trends in cost, and now we're going to compare those costs to those from Brazil. Here is a map of Brazil. If you look at the top one, you'll see all of Brazil and the South American continent. It zooms in on the bottom graph. I am going to look at costs from Mato Grosso. You see the red arrow pointing to Mato Grosso. That is the largest province or state in terms of production in Brazil. It happens to be a growing area as well, and a major soybean producing area. As you can see there, you'll see numbers and then a port that it's listed to. Grain moves from Mato Grosso to ports on the Atlantic Ocean. That is a long distance. It happens to be longer than movements along the Mississippi River from Illinois to New Orleans, but from Mato Grosso to those ports is a long distance, and right now those movements are primarily done by truck. So Mato Grosso to a port, done by truck. Once it's done at ports, loaded on ships and moved to China or another foreign location. Here are the costs, and again, this is on page 3. I'm going to take the column that the blue bar is above, 2012. You can see truck, ocean. Truck $111 per metric ton, ocean $49 per metric ton, $49.70 per metric ton, for a total cost of $161.48 per metric ton. What I'm going to do in the next slide is make a comparison between Illinois cost of transportation versus Mato Grosso cost of transportation. And here that comparison is. And all we've done here is take the columns, Davenport and Mato Grosso, on the page to the left. It pulls cost from the previous slides, slide 7 and slide 9. It pulls those costs into this slide here. You can see total cost Davenport to China, $103 per metric ton. Mato Grosso, $174 per metric ton. I'm going to state that on a bushel basis. That's $2.80 for Davenport to China, $4.74 for Mato Grosso. That is a large difference. And just to give you a feel, soybean bushel in Illinois was priced at $11.50 right now, pretty close to that. And obviously, transportation plays a large part of the total cost. $2.80 compared to $11.50, or $4.74 compared to $11.50. Right now, transportation costs are a large advantage to the U.S. And that, going back, we talked about the comparative advantage of corn in the U.S. to Brazil, and Brazil having a comparative advantage in soybeans. That relates much to this transportation cost difference. Corn is a much lower value per unit of weight than soybeans, and hence these transportation costs would be much larger relative to the total value of the product. Again, that is why U.S. has a comparative advantage in corn production relative to soybean production. Those costs will have impacts on the competitiveness of Brazil versus U.S. in soybean trade and agriculture in general. And as we're moving forward in time, what we generally see is that Brazil is developing its transportation infrastructure, and U.S. may be letting that transportation deteriorate, particularly as it relates to the Mississippi-Illinois barge transportation system. And I'm going to, on the next two slides, talk about that a little bit, and then we'll end with just a little bit of discussion on the implications that has for agribusiness. Here again is a map of Brazil. This map shows or highlights the blue areas, navigatable rivers, and the yellow indicates areas that may come into navigation fairly soon or are planned for navigation. The box or the circle, the animation that you're now seeing, shows where Mato Grosso is at. And remember, right now, grain moves from Mato Grosso by truck to the Atlantic Ocean ports and then off to its international destination. There are two ways that Brazil could significantly reduce its transportation cost. One is to build rail lines from Mato Grosso to the ports. The other one is to figure out or come up with a way of moving that grain by barge. And you could see there, if that yellow line became navigatable, that would allow Mato Grosso producers to move grain up to a port, maybe load it on barge, move it by barge up the Amazon River, and then out to port. That would significantly reduce the cost of transporting soybeans. Whether or not that will happen is an open question. Number of reasons why it might not happen. That happens to be the Amazon area, and environmentalists might oppose that move for a number of reasons. But if that ever became a possibility or reality, the transportation cost between advantage that U.S. currently has would be significantly lessened, maybe even eliminated. The U.S., on the other hand, has a very well-developed barge transportation system and a very well-developed transportation system in general. The barge transportation system, however, is in need of development fixing. Many of the locks and dams that have been put in several years or decades ago, 70 years ago, are in need of replacement. If those don't happen, or those replacements don't happen, the advantage that U.S. has could be significantly reduced because cost of river transportations would go up and may become not practical. The upgrading of locks and dams are controversial and are opposed by environmental groups. Many environmental groups would like there's a range of sentiment, obviously, amongst those groups, but many would like to see the Mississippi River return to a more natural state, which would mean that we would eliminate or significantly reduce locks and dams, stop maintaining maybe the navigable channels, and let the river expand outside of its banks more often. All of those are possibilities, but that comes in direct conflict with transportation on that river of grains and other materials, grains being a big one. So that is a controversy that's happening and will have a direct impact on U.S. competitiveness. The story that you see laying to the right is a St. Louis Beacon article. It's your readings. It is highlighted in your readings in this module. And just take a quick look, and it will show some of the items that are going on now in this debate. And agriculture and lobby groups have been trying to get that development to occur, and so far it's been slow at best. In general, agriculture and agribusinesses would support the development of the Mississippi River and try and make that happen, as it would maintain the competitiveness of the U.S. If those transportation advantages go away, then other countries would have an advantage or a motivation to develop their agriculture and perhaps compete more with U.S. agriculture. I have given an example of transportation and soybeans between U.S. and Brazil. Over time, the advantage that the U.S. has will likely be reduced as Brazil and other countries develop their transportation infrastructure, and perhaps U.S. lets its transportation structure deteriorate. While I've talked about this in terms of soybeans, it's also important for fertilizers and other agricultural inputs. Gave one example for soybeans. And again, final point here. Transportation costs and lowering those is an important key for trade and global exchange. And if you think about, we talked about the advantages to trade. Transportation reduces those advantages. So as transportation costs go up, which is mainly an energy, crude oil relationship, as those go up, the advantage of trade goes down. And that, in overall, reduces trade and overall reduces the well-being of consumers.